My childhood dream was to be a firefighter paramedic. From as long as I could remember, that was everything I wanted to do. And it resulted in a loss of systems and components of the aircraft. No one checked on us. No one asked if we were okay. And if you would have, you would know that we're not okay.
So I know that you're not flying for this company anymore, but what are you doing nowadays?
So I actually am no longer full-time working in EMS. I work part-time. I mostly just go in for station calls for a local county department and a township department that I live close to. And I still work part-time at both of them. But I am in school full-time for accounting, and I work on a horse farm. So I veered off and went the other direction.
I don't know if there's a lot of EMTs or paramedics who venture off into the accounting world, but that's certainly interesting. So what's a little bit of your background in EMS or healthcare?
So my childhood dream was to be a firefighter paramedic. From as long as I could remember, that was everything I wanted to do. When I was 16 in high school, I did a career mentorship course where I actually got to choose a career that I was interested in, and I chose fire EMS. And at 16 years old, I started doing ride-alongs with a fire department outside of Columbus, Ohio, and just fell in love with the career and knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I went to University of Cincinnati. That's where I did my EMT and my paramedic, and worked in Northern Kentucky for a while, and then decided a little bit on a whim to move out to North Dakota and did some rural EMS out there. And in North Dakota, we had to call helicopters a lot because we were about 2 hours away from the closest hospital. We had a critical access center in the town where we lived. The next closest was 2 hours by ground. So we flew a lot of patients, and I was introduced to flight and decided to go for it, and worked rotor for a short time, and then worked fixed wing.
In North Dakota?
No, I moved back to Ohio. So I had left North Dakota and moved back to Ohio.
Oh, I was just at University of Cincinnati a couple months ago. Did some ride stuff with U.C. Air Care. What an amazing program. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so how do you end up going from being a flight paramedic in Ohio to working on a fixed wing aircraft?
I was working on a helicopter in Ohio and also working on for a fire department, but my fire card from the state of Kentucky would not transfer to Ohio, so I was EMS only. So it was not a whole lot of places will take EMS only in the greater Columbus area. So I was working 2 jobs, and the fire department that I was working for, which it's a volunteer fire department paid EMS, they unexpectedly were charged a lot of money in taxes and had to pay back a lot of money and stop staffing the second ambulance that I was on. And so on 6 p.m. on a random weekday, I was told that when I went home at 8 o'clock, I wasn't coming back. So I stayed on part-time, would pick up shifts, but I lost half of my income and had to figure out something else to do. And there were only so many places in Ohio that I could work. So I went on Indeed and started looking at paramedic and flight paramedic, and I found a fixed wing company, and the schedule was 8 days on, 6 days off. So every Monday I was traveling either to an airplane or back home. So they home based. We could live anywhere in the U.S. So the company was based out of Georgia, and they would fly me to wherever the plane was and fly me back home to Ohio.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. And so you can be anywhere in the country, but they've got enough bases. I know you said that they're based out of Atlanta, but they have different bases around the country besides Atlanta?
No, so we would stay in hotels. So there's a couple different ones. The main base for where where the aircraft maintenance would occur was outside of Atlanta, Georgia. But our HR was in Scottsdale, Arizona, and then we had an office in Denver, Colorado that mostly was just supplies. We would keep extra supplies there because we went to a specialty center in Denver so often. But they would fly us to go pick up a patient somewhere in the U.S. or surrounding countries. We'd drop off that patient in a different state or wherever, and then go to a hotel for the night, spend the night somewhere, and do it again the next day. So we were in usually multiple different states every day.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. And so the name of this company, it's kind of it kind of seems like there's like a lot of flight services, like there's a lot of parent companies, but it seems to me that this the main service is Medway Air Ambulance, and the aircraft are kind of owned by Med Air. And are they all a subsidiary of Med Health Partners? Does that right to you?
So it was three different companies. It was Angel Med Flight, Medway Air Ambulance, and Critical Care Med Flight. And in some chain of events, one bought the other and then bought the other and said they all merged, and the umbrella name became Med Health Partners. So Med Health Partners is the umbrella of all three entities. But because of the way that things were split up with the FAA, because things were already licensed, there are like the companies are still separate, but they're all the same. So we could get a request for a flight for Medway and go do it, and then get a request through Angel Med Flight and go do that one. There's still different websites. They're still, so like they're different companies, but it's the same pilots, the same aircraft, the same equipment, the same staff. It was, the only difference was the way that the request came in.
I see. And so as I was kind of looking them up, it's pretty interesting because they have, or at least with Medway Air Ambulance, they've got a lot of different aircraft. I think I looked up that they have 7 Learjet 40s, a couple 31s, and still have 6 of the old 35As lying around. And so that's a pretty active fleet. And I'm not really experienced in long distance critical care medicine like that. So I don't know, tell me a little bit about what is a normal type of call? Because I'm used to going on a call might take 20 minutes, might take an hour and a half, and something tells me your calls might take a day or 12 hours
Yeah.
or something like that. So what is a normal call like for you guys?
They're all different. It's a little bit of a shift in mindset because fixed wing is more continuation of care and not as much emergency care. We would pick up patients from foreign countries that had not been adequately cared for. So then you're more in the emergency mindset and trying to make sure that the basis and every need is met. But majority of it was taking patients that are maybe 1 week post-injury and taking them to a specialty care center, whether they had a TBI or back injury, something of that sort. There's several specialty care centers across the United States, and so we would do a lot of transports to those facilities. We would also take people home. One of my most memorable flights is I flew a hospice patient from New York to California, and it was all day, all the way across the United States, and we were taking him home so that he could be with his family when he passed. And it was one of the most impactful flights for me too, just being able to interact with his wife and his daughter and hear his life story.
Wow. So that's definitely, I mean, that's definitely a different world. What happens when you get to the other end and you can't turn around and go home? So are you shacking up for the night and finding something cool to do in the local town, or what?
Yeah. Depending on what time it is, we usually try to go get dinner as a crew. There are times, and it was unfortunately very frequent, when we would be out till 11 o'clock at night or later. And so we're snacking on a bar and going to bed so that we can get up and do it again the next day. But they would keep us usually in Hilton hotels, and we'd all have our own hotel room. And once you got to the hotel, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted. If you wanted to go out as a crew, you could. If you wanted to go do your own thing, you could.
Yeah, and so and you're not even flying on a smaller aircraft, because the fixed wing that I do have experience with would be like smaller King Airs, like C-90s or 200s, which some of us think are actually big aircraft. I mean, you're flying on Learjet 45s. I mean, so you guys are flying super, super fast. You're flying at super, super high altitude, and you're flying really, really far. I mean, is it still a stressful environment in the back of the aircraft, or is it a little bit more because of the type of the aircraft that's there? Is there more space in the back of those? What's it like in the back?
The Lear 31s and the Lear 35s are actually very small. So there's not a lot of room. So when you walk in the side door, you have the patient cot across from you. And then I think there's 2 seats and then a bench. And all of your equipment has to fit like right behind the bench or with you. And we carry ventilators, multiple bags. We have to have everything with us. And we can't restock between calls because we don't go back to a base. So we carry a lot of extra equipment that we might not need on every call because we have to have it in case we need it. So those are very cramped. There's not bathrooms in them. You're just kind of stuck in this really small environment. The Lear 45s are nicer. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seats. So you have the patient cot, and then there's 3 seats on one side and then 2 seats behind the patient. And then there's a lav in the back. Some of the planes the lav worked, some of them they didn't. And then we also use the lav as our storage for like our bags. We put them on one side and then the lav was on the other. That was a lot nicer because you had more space. It felt like you could actually work. It's still very tight, but if you needed to, you could work on the patient. And ambulance feels like a luxury now because you can stand up in it. Like these planes, you can't really stand up in. So while it seems like they're big, it's still not that big. As far as there's still the stressors of flight, because even though it's a pressurized cabin, we might pressurize it to 5,800. And so you're still above, like at night, you lose your night vision at 5,000 feet. So we're still kind of above that threshold where we're having some of those physiologic changes that you would experience in some other types of aircraft. One of the biggest issues I had flying was dehydration. Because of the recirculation of air and how long our flights were, we would become dehydrated so fast. And especially in those smaller planes where they don't have bathrooms, it's hard to have proper water intake and not have to go to the bathroom and really take care of yourself. So the first couple months that I was with this company, I had headaches constantly because of improper hydration. That, I think, for me was the biggest one. It's also a big consideration with our patients, because if we're flying them across the country and we're getting dehydrated, if they're already dehydrated or in some sort of state like that, we need to consider fluid administration with them and making sure that we're taking care of that need for them as well.
Yeah, that's. I didn't realize that only the 45 had a bathroom in it. I mean, so if you're flying, you're flying from New York to Los Angeles and you can't go to the bathroom, yet you're supposed to be down in all these fluids because you're going to be dehydrated.
Mm-hmm.
Stay mentally fit so you can take care of your patient. But yeah, that's got to be a pretty unique struggle. So the aircraft that you were on for this incident though was a 45, right? I think the tail number was 842. Mike Bravo is kind of, I'll throw some pictures up on the screen here. I got a little confused looking this up because there was a previous tail number from a DC. I don't know if you know what a DC-3 is. Is an old aircraft from about 50 or 60 years ago, but it had that tail number beforehand. So I was like, there's no way she's flying in a military cargo plane. But anyway, so to the incident at hand, I know that this flight originated in Las Vegas. It's really kind of hard to get much public information on this because I don't see it listed anywhere as a reported incident. If it was, it might have disappeared off the FAA's website because sometimes it kind of rolls off. But in terms of it's not listed as an accident, obviously, and so there's nothing listed there. And so really, I think you're really the only one who can tell this story. So this was on August 22nd, 2023. It's really not that long ago, just a little over a year ago now. Walk us through that day. What happened that day and how did it end?
Yeah. So with any flight service, one thing that we focus on and teach a lot is briefing, post-briefing, crew resource management, safety. Those are all really, really big, hot topics, no matter where you go. And we flew with different pilots and different partners on a pretty regular basis. We would have to, we never knew what pilots we would be partnered with until we were about to go on the road. And it was very frequently somebody different. Myself and my partner, on this day, we also had an orientee with us. My partner and I both have rotor backgrounds. And so we are very accustomed to the pre-flight briefs, the checks, everything, walking through that and being a cohesive crew. The way that fixed wing works in comparison to being in the rotor world, and not that this is right, but what I've noticed is that there's less emphasis put on briefing with the medical crew because the medical crew is in the back. So we're not really, whereas in the rotor, I was clearing the right side. I could see everything that was happening. I was communicating with the pilot through my headset. In the back, we can't really communicate with the pilots very well unless we peek our head up in the cockpit and talk to them. So it was very almost like us versus them with a lot of crews that we had, especially crews that like didn't fly rotor before or didn't really feel like the medical crew was actually part of the crew. So on this specific day, we were flying with my favorite pilot, and he remains my favorite pilot after all of this. But one thing that he is very big on is everybody is a crew. Everybody works together. We brief together. We do everything together. So the night before, we were actually looking at the trip that we had scheduled for the next day. So the information came in before. We called and got a report on the patient. So we knew well in advance where we were going. That gave us time to look at the weather. That next morning, they would pre-flight the plane. But we were looking at the weather the night before and noticed that storms were coming into the Dallas, Texas area, which is where we were supposed to land with this patient. We also had an orientee with us, and we were talking about safety and speaking up if something doesn't feel right and planning for what could happen. So the next morning when we had our pre-flight briefing, we were briefed on our specific roles. So we all knew what we were supposed to do. The way that we were seated is the two pilots were up front. The orientee was by the door, by the emergency exit door. And then my nurse partner was right behind her in the second seat. And those two were working together doing direct patient care. I was in the back of the plane charting, and the wife of the patient was sitting right next to me. And she and I communicated a lot. And then the lav was right behind us. So I was in the back of the plane with the wife. They were doing patient care together. But then, of course, we're all right there. So we're all involved in everything. They briefed us on the weather, that there were storms coming into Dallas, and there was a chance that we might have to divert to a different airport if we couldn't make it in for the storms. And then they briefed us on what airports we would be passing on our way there, and that they would let us know if there was anything else that was going on, and then finished. That was really the only thing about the brief that was different than normal. But this captain does not take shortcuts, does not cut things out. So he goes through a very full, specific brief every single time. And then when we're done with the flight, goes through a post brief every single time. So we show up in the morning. The flight crew shows up about an hour before the rest of the pilots do, because we have to get there and actually drive a far distance. An ambulance will come and pick us up at the airport. We have to drive a far distance to go get the patient from the hospital. And then while we're getting the patient from the hospital, they're pre-flighting the plane. Once we get everything ready, we go back, meet together, and then we're up in the air. It was a pretty standard flight. Pre-flight checks were great.
This is starting out in Las Vegas, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to Las Vegas?
So that's interesting. I was actually already in Colorado for my niece's birthday party. The rest of the crew flew to Colorado, and there was a plane sitting in Colorado that we were supposed to take. But for some reason, I don't remember what the decision was, but they flew everybody to Colorado, and then they were like, wait, just kidding. We have this plane in Las Vegas that we need you to go to. So they put us all on a Southwest flight and flew us to Las Vegas. And then we spent the night in Vegas, and the next morning went to go pick up the patient. So this was actually the very first flight that we did on this week hitch.
Okay,
So,
I got you. So yeah, carry on with the flight beginning.
So we get to the aircraft with the patient, get everything loaded. We brief the patient. We brief the wife. They're ready to go. Our patient is on a ventilator. He had I believe he fell and fractured his cervical spine. He was on a ventilator. I can't remember if he was very alert or not, but we would still communicate with our patients as if they were, and then communicate with the wife, all of our safety stuff, oxygen, raft over water, you name it, just the normal. If you were to go on a commercial flight, it's essentially the same brief that we give to our patients and their family members. So plane takes off, no issues. We get all the way up to our altitude hold. We were at 41,000 feet, and altitude checks were great. We were at our cruise flight, and the way that I remember it in the back, so I'll tell you kind of my side of the story, which might be a little different than what my partner or my pilots think, but the chain of events that happened for me, from my perspective, I saw the pilots call my partner up front, and they asked her if she smelled like asked her to smell something and if that was coming from the patient. And she said, no, that smells electrical. And they were like, that's what we thought. We're putting the plane on the ground. So by this point, there were no warning lights. They thought maybe something flashed like it was a warning light, but they said it also could have been the sun reflecting off something because it was so fast. There were no warning lights. It was just this sense that something wasn't right. And that's like strike one of, not strike one, but like kudos point number one is, hey, we feel like something's not right. Let's get it on the ground. Let's figure it out there. So without any hesitation, they were getting ready to land. By this point, we were getting ready to fly over Albuquerque, New Mexico. The captain had a Garmin inReach that we were not standard on the planes at this point. They are standard on the planes now, but he had his own personal Garmin inReach that he brought with him. And by doing so, he was able to text, I think it was the director of operations. I can't remember what his title was, but he was able to text him and say, emergency landing electrical, and said that we were going to try and land in Lubbock, Texas. And by that point, those on the ground were able to get emergency services started for us in Lubbock, Texas, knowing that we were coming in. Everything happened really fast after that point. They told us to secure the cabin, make sure everything is tied up, ready to go. So we made sure everything was tied down. When they went through their checks again, they realized that we were running off of our emergency battery, that our right generator was not producing any power. And for some reason, the systems that were in place to combat that did not function properly. So they should have been notified. There should have been a lot more that happened rather than us just continuing flight, not realizing that there's an issue. So we ended up having an abnormal electrical malfunction, and it forced us to have an immediate landing, and it resulted in a loss of systems and components of the aircraft. So we started to descend, and our captain realized that we were very quickly losing our emergency battery. He said that it was like 25%, 24%, 23%, 22%, and he just saw our emergency battery draining. He made the decision, because he knows his systems very, very well, to go ahead and, when we were still at 19,000 feet, drop our landing gear. And he said, when we talked about it after, he said in his mind, number one, we still had power to be able to know that they are down and they are locked. So regardless of where we land, if we're on a roadway, if we're in a field, if we're somewhere, we have landing gear and we know that they're down and secured. Second, when we lost everything, we lost any way to slow down. We did not have flaps. We did not have trim. We had no way to slow the aircraft down. So he said his thought process was, by dropping the landing gear, it would also create drag and help slow us down. So he dropped those around 19,000 feet. And right after that, everything, we lost pretty much everything. It felt like we had lost an engine. It felt like it was in the back. It was just very, very shaky, very uneven, and we were going down really fast. I found out after that they were trying to communicate with ATC, but the emergency comms doesn't hit repeaters. It just goes radio to radio. And there just so happened to be a SkyWest plane flying directly above us at the time that this happened that heard our emergency traffic, related to ATC, who relayed back to us a heading, a distance, and a runway length. So we had a 5,700-foot unmanned airport runway that we were trying to find.
Yeah, so let me get this straight. You guys are headed to Dallas. You call this emergency to get to Lubbock. In the midst of getting to Lubbock, you guys have to descend. You're realizing that things are far worse than it actually is, and your emergency comms cannot actually reach ATC, and the radio signal leaving your aircraft actually hits a commercial plane, and those pilots pick it up and they relay the message to ATC, and then also relay messages back to you guys?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is
wild.
Geez, what a miracle! That's absolutely insane. And so, so now whatever coordinates that your pilots have, they've received from a SkyWest plane who just happened to be in the area.
And we didn't have navigation.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, we did not have navigation by this point either. We just had a heading and about 20 miles is all that we knew. So They put it in. So they're at all electronics are gone, and they're just going off of their analog systems. So during all of this, our pilots communicated with us so incredibly well. They told us what to expect, what we were going to feel. And at this point, when they realized that there was an airport 20 miles away, one of them turned around and said, hey, we're going to be descending really quickly. So we essentially just, because we had a cloud layer, we were up at 19,000 feet, we had a cloud layer at 12,000 feet, and we had to get below the cloud layer to visually search the ground and try to find this airport. And that's what they did. But because I knew to expect that we were descending quickly, I was like, okay, this is what's supposed to happen. It didn't feel like we were going to crash. It didn't feel like we were, honestly, at this point, it didn't really feel like we were in danger to me. It wasn't until later that it kicked in. On a side note to all of this, while this is happening, we don't have Wi-Fi in the plane, so we can't text, but you can airdrop iPhone to iPhone. And my partner was sitting right in front of me, and she airdropped me, and she said, I think we lost the right engine. And I could see from the back that the right side of the aircraft had no power. None of the screens were on, nothing was working, but the left side still had screens on. But then, so I responded back and said, there's still screens on the left side. And then right after that, those screens went off too. So it was kind of as we were losing power. And at one point, so we went back and forth a couple times, and my response back to her was, they've got this. We're going to be okay. And that was truly how I felt. And not until we were close to the ground did I feel that we were in any danger. And I truly had that much trust and faith in my pilots to get us on the ground because of the way that they communicated with us, the way they've briefed, how seriously they take this job. Like that our captain, just complacency is not in his vocabulary. Like there is no point that I have ever seen him become complacent, but it's because he's seen tragedy and knows how bad it can be, that he is always on top of his game, and he takes no flight is routine, every flight is serious, and every flight could be your last. And that's how he approaches it. And he does everything in his power. So my partner and I are having this dialogue back and forth as all of this is happening. On top of that, the patient's wife, our passenger, was asleep when all of this started. So I woke her up to communicate with her that, hey, we are having some sort of issue with the aircraft. It's okay. We are going to be landing in Lubbock, Texas. And then it was not okay. And we didn't land in Lubbock, Texas. But the entire time as they're communicating with us, we are communicating with our patient and our patient's wife. And that allowed her to stay calm, the patient to stay calm, and honestly, everybody in the aircraft stayed very calm throughout this entire incident. So we get down 12,000 feet, it's the cloud layer. We get below the cloud layer. We level out. It is still very jerky and very uneasy.
And I think I forgot to ask, what time of day was this?
Around noon. It was like it was just the middle of the day. Bright outside, sunny, just a normal afternoon.
And it was clear outside? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Other than the cloud layer at 12,000 feet, it was a beautiful day. So we're descending. We get below the clouds. We can see the ground, and they are searching for the airport, and they found it. And the way that the wind was blowing, we had to go past it and come back around and land. So they're trying to slow down, but we don't have flaps, so it's hard to slow down. So we're getting pretty close to the ground. I had service on my phone for a long time, so I know that we were pretty close to the ground for several minutes before we landed. And I'm looking out, and I'm like, we're very low. And that was when I started to get nervous. And that's when I realized how fast we were going. And I was like, we might not actually make this. So we are flying past. So here's our airport. We're flying past it. We bank left and come back. And our co-pilot yells, brace for impact, brace, brace, brace. And they slammed it onto the ground. Because of how short the runway was and how fast we were going, they planted it on the ground intentionally to, as soon as the asphalt started, so that we had the entire length of the runway to try and stop. The goal of the co-pilot was just to keep the nose in the middle of the runway. Don't let it veer left or right. Just keep it right in the middle. And we didn't have brakes. So like your car, you have an emergency brake. Our captain pulled the emergency brake, and at some point near the end of the runway, our tires popped and our nose wheel went off the end of the runway and actually hit a very small runway light. And that little small runway light is what brought us to a stop. So our mains, our two back wheels were still on the runway. So when you said earlier, there's not much information about it. When you look it up on the FAA, there was no fire, there was no death or injury, and it was not considered a runway excursion because our mains were still on the asphalt, even though the front of the plane went off. It didn't meet criteria for full investigation. Now, there is investigation as to why one of the parts malfunctioned, because that should not have happened. It just a crazy event. It wasn't a maintenance issue. It wasn't anything else. It was we had electronics malfunction sometimes, and this electronic malfunctioned. So everybody knew their roles.
And so where did you end up landing at?
We ended up in Portales, New Mexico. I've never heard of it either. So yeah, we ended up in Portales, New Mexico. The airspace that we were in is also, I believe, the Air Force. And so they were watching us, and I believe they had started emergency services to the Portales airport. And then my partner also called 911 when we got on the ground so that we had people coming to help us. One thing I didn't think about is that they set the pressurization of the aircraft so that when we land, the pressurization in the aircraft matches the pressurization outside. Our pressurization was set towards Dallas, Texas, not Portales, New Mexico. So when we opened the door, that instant pressure change like makes your ears pop. I was not expecting that to be part of it, and that's not something that I had ever thought of before, but that was super interesting. And then again, because we all knew
I probably wouldn't have thought of that either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we all knew our roles, immediately the pilots made sure that there was no fire, that we were safe, and that we could remain in the aircraft until the ambulance got there. Because again, our patient is laying down on a ventilator with a trach, and it's not easy to get patients on and off of the aircraft. But if we needed to do it in an emergency, we were going to have to go now. So thankfully, because there was no fire, we all had a minute to just take a breath and make sure patient was okay, make sure his wife was okay, make sure we were all okay. And within maybe 2 minutes, fire trucks, ambulances were all screaming down the runway coming right towards us. So they got there really quick. And
so this airport, did it have a tower or emergency services there? No. Or did the emergency services come from like in the town or something?
In the town. There was no, and I don't know this for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was volunteer fire where we landed as well, because it was a very small town. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a volunteer service. They were wonderful, though. They were absolutely wonderful. At that point, now we're on the ground and we have to figure out what do we do with the patient, right? Because we can't take off and continue to our destination. And so we told them to take us to the hospital, and the hospital had to call, I think they had to call an RT in from that wasn't working. And when I called and just to let you know how small of a hospital it was, when I called them and gave report and said he has a trach and a vent, they were like, so he's intubated. And I was like, he has a trach. They were like, but you said he's on a ventilator. It's like, yes, through the trach. And like, it was like not. So when I said trach, we got there and they didn't have a vent ready because they were like, but you said he has a trach. Like they're used to like just people living with trachs, they don't hold patients long enough. Yeah, well, they don't hold patients long enough to see the progression from the intubation to the trach if the patient needs the respiratory support. So it was very interesting and we had to show them how to use some of the equipment and how to take care of it a little bit. And so it was interesting, but they were wonderful, wonderful with us. And as soon as we dropped the patient off and dropped the wife off, I went and was like, where's your break room? And I went to their break room and I just lost it. And that was when I like let go. The wife gave my crew and I probably the best compliment I think I've ever received. And she told us that she felt so safe with us the entire time because of how calm and controlled the entire crew was, that she felt like we had it and she was going to be okay. And she was okay. Did I feel like we had it all the time? It was scary, but she was okay. We're all okay.
I mean, it sounds like the pilots did an absolutely amazing job. It sounds like you guys did a good job in the back as well. I mean, Jesus, that sounds, God, that just sounds so scary, and just a long time of unpredictableness. I don't know or not, but that's absolutely wild. So then after you drop them off at the hospital, I mean, it's going to be so bizarre taking somebody who's a critical care patient of some sort and dropping them off at this super rural hospital. But then what do you do after that? Do you find your way back to Ohio? Is there a big official debrief session or something like that? Or what happens after that?
So we went back to, the ambulance took us back to the airport so we could all be together. And then we had a kind of emergency debrief or just post-incident debrief quickly right after everything happened. Yeah. Right after it happened, while we were still at the airport, they set us up in a separate room and we all were able to debrief and talk about it right then. And then they got us hotel rooms in Portales for the night. They actually flew in, I believe that night, they flew the director of operations from Georgia to Lubbock, and then he drove 2 hours to come and be with us as a support system, which I was super grateful for because we're alone in this small town, and we went and had dinner together, and we went to it was insane. But then we stayed overnight, and the next day they ended up putting us on commercial flights and sending us all home. And then they had another plane come in with a different crew to transport the patient.
Geez, that's absolutely wild. I mean, to me, it sounds like one of those events that one, there's probably a maintenance issue in there somewhere of trying to determine what is the issue mechanically with the aircraft or electronically with the aircraft, and how can we learn from that? I don't know what that issue was. I don't know if you do, but in the end, it certainly sounds like something that I would want to share as an operator with the rest of my company. Look what happened. We had this emergency. The reason for the emergency is one reason, but look at how it was dealt with. We've got what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got, is it 7 people total on the aircraft that are walking away from this alive and using it as a learning experience. Do you feel like that happened? Is that something that happened afterwards? Where like, let's use this as a learning experience and kind of move forward from this, or what do you think?
No, I don't feel like that's what happened. There are some ways in which the company responded to this that I am extremely grateful for, and some ways that they were supportive of us that I'm thankful that they did. And then there's other ways where I actually did provide feedback and be like, hey, if this happens again, or if someone, not necessarily this incident, but when these incidents happen, because we work in flight and things go wrong sometimes. When these incidents happen, here's what we needed. Here's what it would have been helpful. And here's, I feel like from my perspective, what we could have taken away from it, what we could have learned. We were sent home and then that was it. Like, I didn't hear from anybody from the company. I was on a Tuesday and I didn't hear from anybody from the company for the rest of the week. And so on Friday, I ended up calling the director of clinical operations. And I was again, my nerves and my emotions are still elevated at this point. And so I was trying to, if I don't tell them how I'm feeling, they don't know. And so I called him and I was like, hey, you don't know how I feel unless I tell you. I said, we were sent home. No one checked on us. No one asked if we were okay. And if you would have, you would know that we're not okay. We're struggling right now. And it was more, by this point, I wasn't communicating with the pilots as much. I didn't know how they were doing, but myself and my partner, she and I talked a lot, and we were both struggling, and it didn't feel like we had support. And I was met with, I said that my perception is you either don't care or you don't understand the gravity of the situation that we just encountered. And I was met with, how could you say that? I don't care about you. I care about you guys all the time. Like, I can't believe that you would say that to me. And was met with hostility rather than, hey, I'm sorry, we've been working on stuff behind closed doors. We've been trying to figure out what's going on. I am so sorry that you felt this way. Let's make this right. Let's change this. Here's the plan going forward. And I think an opportunity there, and what I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, is that usually there's plans in place for physical injury or death, but there's not often a plan in place for emotional injury after these types of things. But people need support. And just having one person within the organization, hey, it's going to be your job as a leader within this organization to reach out to them, check on them, make sure they feel seen, make sure they feel heard and supported, because we didn't have that, and that really compounded my emotional injury from this. Once I expressed how I was feeling, even though I was met with what I felt was hostility at first, we did start to have more communication between us and leadership.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because in EMS or any type of public safety, police, fire, EMS or whatever, we have critical debriefing. Now, I'm not going to say that critical incident stress debriefing or CISD or CISM somehow solves all of the world's problems, but it at least is a resource that exists. And 15, 20 years ago it was kind of non-existent, but today it's at least a part of a lot of standard operating procedures at different air ambulance services, even ground services, police, fire. It's a part of the service. And so it almost sounds to me like whoever you're talking about with the director of ops sounds like maybe they're a good dude or a good person or whatever, but maybe the company didn't even have like a CISD plan in place for, well, how are we going to handle types of things if a critical incident happens, or maybe their definition of just what a critical incident wasn't defined enough.
Yeah. And we actually had an incident a couple months before this where an FBO put the wrong fuel in one of the aircrafts, and they had lost both engines at max altitude. And so there was another, and they had a very successful landing too because of those pilots. But that was another very serious critical incident that, again, support wasn't provided. I don't know that anyone from that incident asked for it like I did, but I think that, and it's hard too, because I know that they are so focused on figuring out why this happened, what happened, was it an issue on our end, was it something else? And they're working with these different organizations to figure out what was going on, because they did notify the FAA, and the FAA was actually there on site when this incident happened. So for something completely unrelated. So they were there and they knew, but they're so focused on dealing with everything else surrounding it that I just don't think they realized that we needed support. And unless that perspective is brought back in, those people can often be left and be kind of forgotten about a little bit. And then it causes, me to feel feelings of animosity toward the leadership because I feel like you don't care, but they do care. They're just working on so many other things at the same time, but that's not communicated with me and I don't see it. So it's all about, I feel like, perception and what's my perspective. And now having those fresh eyes of being the person on this side of the event and not the other side of the event, now I realize how important it is to have somebody and have a plan in place for emotional injury of your people. And it doesn't have to be, I almost died. It could be, that was a really complicated call that reminded me of something at home. It could be, I have a child that's the same age, and I see, even if they didn't pass away, I see how bad that could have been, and that scares me for my own kid. There's all sorts of calls that can create emotional injury within providers. It doesn't just have to be them being in a life or death situation like it was for us. So I think it's so important to have that in place, and we didn't, and then we were provided with EAP. The problem with EAP is that they're not first responders, so they don't know. So as this was trying to be explained,
always the problem.
As this was trying to be explained, they thought that my partner was a flight attendant, and she's like, "I'm not a flight attendant." So then you're having to try to make someone understand your job and what you do, and that almost creates more frustration because you're like, you just don't get it. You don't get it. And so EAP in this situation, even though it was provided, it was not helpful at all.
Right. I mean, it certainly sounds like, when it comes to EAP, and sometimes I've seen agencies bring in social workers or outside therapists to critical incident stress who are not, experts in public safety, and that's always the problem, man. They don't know what you're doing. They don't know who you are. They don't know where your brain is. They're just looking at it from kind of a general aspect. I mean, you mentioned that case with the wrong fuel that happened, 3, 4, or 5 months earlier. That was in a 35, I think, and that was out of Arizona. But they actually, and there was med crew on board that. Mm-hmm. And then, a couple years before that, and a couple years before that, Medway actually has, Medway has actually had 2 other incidents, which they actually all 3 of those actually go down as accidents, though. And so it's really interesting because when I looked up these, you had one in Key West, you had one in Colorado Springs, and you had this one in Page, Arizona. And they were different reasons, hard landings, an unstabilized approach on one, wind shear on the other, and then the wrong fuel that you mentioned. But because there was so much damage to the aircraft, those showed up as accidents. Yours is not even listed anywhere. So it kind of comes across to me as these incidents happen, they occur, and if you felt like this, and maybe your partner, I know you're not speaking for your partner, but I got to assume that your partner, especially, you said there was a recruit on board or a new person or orientee, whatever you guys call them, on board, and then the pilots themselves. I mean, the pilots saved the day, right? But it still has to be somewhat traumatic to have gone through it, and it seems like there certainly should be some level of peer support, right? Where, I mean, don't you think it would have been helpful to have received some support from other peers within this organization, even if it wasn't management, just somebody from the country who's been through it, who was on one of these other flights? Hey, let me talk to you about my incident, and let me talk to you about your incident. You think that would have helped?
I do. What was a little frustrating in the moment is that there were lots of people from the organization that were texting me, texting my partner, texting everyone, and some of them, it's like, I know that they care, and others, it almost felt like they just wanted to know what was happening and just wanted information. And so as long as it's like, I think as long as the approach is correct, or it's a team that's already established. That was one of, when I provided feedback on the experience and said, hey, these are what I feel are areas of opportunity. That was one of them that I had brought up, is having a peer support team led by someone in management, but that's not a direct superior. Because I don't want to go to my direct superior and be like, I'm really struggling, but then also they're the one in charge of my job. Like, it's sometimes, depending on the person, you don't always want to talk to that. So I was thinking like an education coordinator or someone that's there to help, that doesn't have any say over whether you're employed or not, but could be a listening ear and could be trained in all of that and could lead a peer support team with other people within the organization. That was what I felt would be what I would have wanted in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And so, hopefully they take it as we're supposed to learn from all this stuff, right? So hopefully they take it as a learning. So when something does happen in the future, they can put some of this advice, some of this peer support network stuff into play. But I know for me, I mean, a lot of us, we learn by continuing education. We learn by talking with others. And how you and I got hooked up is we were both we were both speaking at the same conference, within the last couple of months. And I think, I don't know if it was just you, if your partner was also going to speak at that. But I seen your info, said crash survivor or incident survivor or whatever it said. It was, you were going to talk about your story, and I was like, well, I'm definitely going to that session. And then it popped up on social media, and I'm reading this right here. I'll share this on the screen, but it basically says from the conference that they were the conference themselves. They were contacted by MedHealth Partners Corporate Counsel. So, like we said the beginning, MedHealth is this conglomerate of all these these two or three other flight services, including Medway, which is the kind of the service you were with. But their counsel, their legal, that means their lawyers contacted them, and a careful thorough review was performed, and that they exhausted all their own resources and contacted their own legal counsel, and that there was some confidentiality agreements that were in place before, and that now they think that you presenting is ill-advised, and then basically they pull the plug and say this is kind of too much of a risk for us, so we don't think that you should speak on our platform. And I can't really necessarily blame the conference. I don't know the ins and outs of what their legal legal advice might be, but I swear that it seems to go completely against the intuition of an event like this. Is some mistake was made, and a lot of positives were made. I don't know what the mistake was, because who knows what the electrical or mechanical issue was that led to this, but there's a lot of positives, and you're telling me right now all these positives about the communication and how important the briefing was, and how important it was to communicate with the patient and the patient's wife and the orientee, and then maybe some lessons learned afterwards. And the parent company is going out of their way to it seems, based on this. I mean, do you think that they are going out of their way to restrict you from being able to talk about this?
I think they're trying to, but we're here. So they're not going to. Yes, I felt that way. Yeah. They yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why they would think that. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't either, because no part of what we were planning to say would have reflected negatively on the organization. In fact, we were planning to highlight all of the things that did well. For example, when I went back to fly, I took about a month off, and I went back for one rotation before I separated from the company. And they sent my immediate supervisor, the chief flight paramedic, to come fly with me as support. So he was there if I needed help, but he was also there to take care of the patient if I was like, I just can't do this. And I was very grateful for that. They paid for some therapy for my partner. Like, there was like some stuff that they did really well. So we were planning to highlight all these things. So it was a little unexpected on my part, but to me, that kind of just says that there's something to hide. And I know, so what I was not necessarily planning to talk about, but there's a lot of the aircraft that you mentioned at the beginning are out of service. Right now, there's only like 2 or 3 aircraft that are flying at a time. So because of like the maintenance, and Learjets are meant to be like a weekend flyer, and we're putting so many hours on these aircraft that we're kind of using them past what they're made to do. There were some other instances that I was part of that, like, I haven't talked about. So it just feels like there's this big culture of secrecy and of shoving things under the rug and not talking about it. And so when this happened, to me, it screams, what are you hiding? So the confidentiality agreement that they were referring to is my new hire agreement that I signed, stating that I can't share trade secrets or confidential information. Last I checked, how to crash a plane is not a trade secret. And it's also not confidential. So I don't understand where this came from. I don't understand why we weren't able to speak. At the same time, can't blame the conference for trying to protect themselves. But I was very disheartened and very frustrated and very hurt by this, because after all this happened, when I had that conversation with the director of clinical operations, I was angry and I was frustrated with the way that I was met. And it essentially felt like he was telling me how to feel, like I was being gaslit. It felt like I was being mansplained as to why this was happening. And then my separation from the company was also a little bit tumultuous, in which I had put in my 2 weeks notice. And when I was flying with my chief flight paramedic, I remembered how much I loved the job. And I really like the chief flight paramedic. And we had a good week. Things went really well. And he kept saying, just stay on part-time, just stay on part-time. Because I was very involved with the education department, and my goal within the organization was to become the education coordinator. And there had been talk about it for like 6 months to a year before this incident and all this like preparation for it, but it was never going to come. I was doing the work and they weren't having to pay me extra for it. So they're going to continue to let me do as much work as I'm willing to give and not pay me for it. So when I left, I told them that I was initially going to go back to nursing school and decided to switch gears. But I told them I was starting school, and the 8 weeks on, or 8 days on, 6 days off is just a really hard schedule to maintain for an extended period of time. So after flying with the chief flight medic and remembering just how much I love flight, how much I love critical care medicine, how much I love taking care of the patients, how much I love being on the road with these crews, I told him, okay, I'll stay part-time, because it was like you had to have like 4 days of availability a month or something like that. Like, it wasn't big requirements, and it was something that I was able to fulfill. And he said, consider it done. I've already talked to them. I will be in contact with you later this week. And I said, okay, sounds good. Well, the job I was supposed to start fell through. It kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. So I sent him a text and was like, hey, I will have availability in the next couple weeks if you need anything filled, but I can only come out for 4 days. And I got an email back saying, essentially, we feel that it's in your best interest for you to focus on school and for you to focus on all this stuff. And you said this, so we're not going to keep you on part-time because we're doing you a favor. And again, I'm like, you're still telling me what I can and can't do. You're still mansplaining stuff to me. And so them coming back and saying, you can't speak at this conference and blocking me, it again feels like they're trying to control what I do. They're trying to keep it silenced. And I think that they just want people to do their job and be quiet. And I did that for a long time. And I got to the point where I was like, this isn't right. This isn't safe. And I'm not going to be quiet about it anymore. And to me, it just felt like they didn't like it. And so I'm no longer with the company.
Do you recall, as part of your onboarding stuff, I know you guys you spoke about briefing and you guys did a little hot wash and stuff like that. Do you remember crew resource management actually being of this agency? Do they talk about it? Was it in the training of here's CRM, here's our SOP or something like that? Did they ever talk about crew resource management?
They say the words, but I don't feel like there was ever adequate education provided on what crew resource management actually is and why it's important.
Yeah, and the reason that I ask is they're not CAMES accredited, right? But they are accredited by NAMTA. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right, and so they've got a North American or a national accreditation with NAMTA, which is kind of like an alternative to CAMES. I don't know if it's any better or any worse, but they're also accredited because you said that you guys fly around the world with, I don't know if you pronounce it Urami or Urami, which it's an accreditation service for Europe, and a staple of both of them. Just a quick kind of search of their literature, even looking specifically at NAMTA, it says crew resource management is a fundamental aspect of NAMTA accreditation services, and so while it sounds like your pilots and you and your partner and even the wife and the patient, well, not the patient because you said he couldn't really talk, but everybody on board was kind of participating in crew resource management on the plane itself. But a big part of crew resource management is quality control and debriefing and look at incidents like this and not just do critical incident stress debriefing, but doing some type of incident analysis so that you can prevent it from happening again. Or if people like you noticed these very specific things, or especially the pilots. I mean, I'm sure the pilots, there's things that they did that they didn't even tell you that have to do with aviation, of how they were able to successfully get on the ground, the communications work. Oh my God, why would you not want to share that your that you got either vectors or location or coordinates of some sort on where to land relayed to you through a SkyWest plane? Why would you not want to share that so that other people know about that resource or can learn from that that incident. It just completely boggles my mind why they wouldn't want to share that.
I agree. So we did another debrief 2 weeks after, I think, a week after. No, it was about a week after the incident. And that was because we had asked for it, because we were like, what is going on with the plane? What have you found? And I don't know exactly. I don't have an answer because I wasn't really given an answer. What they thought was wrong wasn't what was wrong, but they replaced all of the parts that they could think of that would cause the issue, but nothing in all of their tests and checks, nothing really came back off. So we don't even really have an answer as to why this happened. But that part of it is being investigated, is being looked into. And then because so many people were asking about it and contacting us about it, they ended up putting an email out to the organization that was very brief and didn't say much, but it did address that this had happened. That's about the extent of that. So,
right. So you don't even know what the mechanical or electrical cause of this incident was?
We had suspicion, but they went out. So they actually had a third party come and do the maintenance on the plane and check everything. They contacted Bombardier. They contacted all of these different organizations. So it wasn't our in-house maintenance. Our in-house maintenance looked at it too. And we have a pilot that he's a pilot and he's one of our maintenance guys, and he's incredible. And he was the one that actually flew the plane back to Georgia because he went out there and did his own checks on it. But the third party maintenance company that we brought in to look at the plane, my understanding, and I could be wrong in this, but my understanding in talking about it was that what they thought it was a power distribution panel that went bad. But when they checked all of them, they were still functioning appropriately. But the power distribution panel is what communicates and what would have said that the rate generator was not communicating or not functioning. I think. I'm not a mechanic, so please take my very basic level knowledge with a grain of salt. But that was my understanding, and come to find out that wasn't the issue.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. So this event happened on 8/22, and if you just look at the ADS-B data, it just about 8 days later they were able to fly the aircraft to Amarillo. It looks to me like September 6th that aircraft was just back in service and is flying all over the country. And so when I look at it here, I mean, it's just all over the place. Oh, they even went to Bermuda. Check that out. That's pretty cool. And so it's just interesting that, if had you stayed working there, well, actually, I guess you still were working there at the time. You said you stayed for a month, but if you had stayed working there for long, or other people who are paramedics or nurses or respiratory therapists, they're going to get on that plane. Somebody got on that plane and nobody knew. The med crew didn't really seem to have any, at least based on what you're saying, didn't really have any explanation of what happened, or is it going to happen again? Is this aircraft good to go? But then again, that's kind of internal stuff, and it seems like that kind of stuff should be shared and learned from. But anyway, I digress on that completely. And so you it's got to be such a letdown. I mean, how did it feel once you found out that you couldn't tell this story at a conference?
I was pretty mad. I was pretty mad, and the key things that I want people to understand is what went well for this to be successful. And really, it comes down to what we we're just talking about, crew resource management. Even within the organization, when I went back to work, I flew with a pilot that didn't want to brief us. And my partner and I were like, no, you will brief us because we're not getting on that plane if you don't, is kind of how the conversation went. And in nicer words than those, it was, we need this from you. We need to be briefed. We know what's right and what's not. And there is a briefing checklist that's supposed to be followed that wasn't being followed by most pilots. And because of who the pilots were, because of the communication, because of the trust that we had built over time, because crew resource management was the core of this crew, that's the most important thing. And so for me, by not being able to speak there, it's less about my story and this specific story and the emotional impact or any of that. It's less about that and more about check with your organization. Keep your eyes open. Are you properly being briefed? Is there open, honest communication between all departments? Is there openness about what's actually happening within the organization? Are they communicating with you? Because I didn't feel like we had that. So part of what we wanted to talk about was, is there emotional support after in your PIP? How does your company handle these situations? But even still, these crew resource management isn't just important when there's emergencies. It is something that you do every single time, every single flight, so that you don't get complacent, so that when the emergency happens, that's your nature. That's what you go to. You fall to your training. And if that's your training and that's your baseline, that's what you're going to fall to. And that's what the crew and the pilots fell to. We all knew our roles. We all knew what we had to do. We all knew what we were responsible for, and we all stayed within our roles and responsibilities for this to be successful. So having that communication is so, so important. And that message is what needs to be shared. That message it's not about the specifics of what happened to our aircraft. It's not about, well, we don't know what exactly the situation was. It's about that communication, because it could be any incident. It doesn't have to be this one. It could be any incident that this can be applied to. And hopefully, I pray it makes it successful for those other crews.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very, very well said, and I appreciate you having the guts to tell this story and to relive it, because I'm sure just speaking about it in itself is a little traumatic. But one other thing that might go overlooked is the importance of having two pilots. In the fixed wing industry across the United States for the last 15 years, there have been a lot of fixed wing accidents, fatal ones. And I've done some stories on them. Maybe I'll put one down in the description of this story or whatever. But there's certainly there certainly has been a trend with fixed wing accidents over the last 15 years. And what I find astonishing from most of the fixed wing stories is that so many, we don't even know what happened. There was one. Multiple out of Alaska where we don't even know what happened. Then there's one in Hawaii last year that we don't know what happened. There was one going from Reno to Salt Lake City last year in a Pilatus, which is like the Ferrari of fixed wing aircraft for air ambulances, and we don't know what happened. And so it's just I think it's one of the commonalities of those is they were all single pilot. And so the fact that you guys had two pilots and we're able to share the workload between those two pilots and delegate tasks. I'm not sure what the specifics was of their delegation, but I gotta believe that if there was a single pilot and the aircraft crashed and killed everybody, would they have known this little? Would they have been able to discover this little issue in the evidentiary investigation? Maybe. I don't know. But the fact that you guys had two pilots. And I don't know, is that something that you've thought of before? That the fact that you had two pilots really could have been the difference between you sitting here telling this story and looking at an investigation instead?
I actually haven't considered that about it being single versus dual. I think I take for granted that we had two pilots on every flight. Yeah, I definitely, I think it's important. And rotor's the same, right? I wish that in the helicopters we could have two pilots too, because we were single pilot, single engine for the company I flew for. And it definitely helps to share. But then also this is, well, in the HIMSS world, we would do the checklist back and forth between, like, I was sat on the right side and then the pilot. So it would be call and response between us, but having the two pilots to have their eyes on everything and double check each other and ask questions, or someone can be doing one thing while someone else has got the emergency book, or, it's, that teamwork is so important. And then the level of
absolutely, and
the level of experience from each pilot too, because our captain is very, very experienced with years in the military and years flying helicopters and planes and just phenomenal, versus our co-pilot who was newer. And just like the two experience levels, my hope is that like she can even learn from what he's doing and help make her a better pilot over time too, because of the way he responded and because of his experience level that he can now impart to somebody else that's a newer person.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well said. Kudos to your pilots. A big kudos to you and your partner, your poor orientee, who probably has a completely different perspective, being brand new, and then the patient and their family. I mean, kudos to everybody. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're telling this story. And if there's even one other crew member anywhere around the world who can learn from this incident, then it's worth it to kind of relive it. Do you have any social media or anything like that you want to share with anybody, or you want me to put it down in the description below or something like that so somebody can reach out to you if they ever need anything?
Yeah. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. But I have Instagram and Facebook, and people can reach out, send me messages, and I'm happy to talk to people about my experience, or if they have their own experiences or whatever they need, and even just be. It was very emotional, and it took me a lot of months to even, I don't want to say move past, because it's been a year. It's still fresh. It hasn't been that long, but it's taken a lot of time to heal and a lot of time to, I struggled with anxiety for a while and panic attacks and a lot of stuff after that. So whatever, I just want people to know too that however they respond to an incident is normal. If you walk away from a life or death situation and you're just like, it's fine. Like, that's not as normal. It's okay to feel things. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to have that anxiety. It's okay to have panic attacks, and just know that you're not alone in whatever you're experiencing. Because until my partner and I were like, are you having problems? Because I'm having problems. And we both realized that the other person was struggling. We both were like, is this normal? Is it not? And we realized that it is normal because we both were struggling with it. So if you guys have your own stories, just feel free to reach out and ask questions or share whatever you want.
Yeah, we'll definitely post it below so that if anybody does want to to reach out to you, we can certainly do that. Well, you're a super tough woman, and I thank you for coming on. I hear you're going to school for accounting, so best of luck with that, and I hope you keep your paramedic license forever, because that's a lifelong journey. Maybe you can find somewhere cool to work part-time or something like that. So thanks for coming on, and we'll stay in touch, okay?
All right. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate you having me.